A restaurant in New York. Candlelight flickering. The guy drops to one knee, ring out. The whole room goes quiet. Full Hollywood mode. She covers her mouth. Someone's already recording on their phone. And then, the applause explodes like 4th of July fireworks. But here's the interesting part. If that exact scene had happened 50 years ago in certain U.S. states, that love story could have been illegal. Sounds like a joke, right? It's not. There are marriage laws that sound like something typed at 2 a.m. on Reddit. But they were, or in some cases still are, completely legal. This is 31 marriage laws so crazy, they're still legal. And trust me, some of these laws didn't just ruin a date. They split families apart. Story 1, when love had to pass. Inspection. They loved each other in the most American way possible. Weekend dates, arguing over who forgot to take out the trash. Making up with burgers and the sacred promise, I won't watch the next episode without you. Then one day he drops to one knee. She says, I do. They think the hardest part is picking wedding flowers. The state they lived in had other plans. The law said 2 people of different races were not allowed to marry. Not discouraged, banned. So instead of wedding photos, they ended up with mugshots. Not because they did anything wrong. They were just in love. But the law at the time believed love needed supervision. They took the case all the way to the Supreme Court. In 1967, the ban was overturned. And the part that still gives people chills. It was completely legal before that. And trust me, marriage laws only get stranger from here. Story 2, the wedding night and the court date. They had the perfect ceremony. White flowers, soft music. Both families hugging and crying like it's the season finale of a drama series. Everything screamed happily ever after. 3 weeks later, they're standing in court. Not because of cheating. Not because of money. Not because of in-laws. The reason, they never consummated the marriage. Sounds like a joke, right? It's not. In many legal systems, failure to consummate can be grounds for annulment. Not divorce. Annulment. As in, legally, it's like the marriage never even happened. The logic goes like this: marriage includes the obligation of marital relations. If that doesn't happen, one spouse can ask the court to erase the whole thing. Now imagine a lawyer standing up and saying, Your Honor, we just needed time. The courtroom goes silent. No one wants follow-up questions. And if you think that's the strangest reason a marriage can disappear, just wait. Story 3, when love had to wait for a ruling. They'd been together for over 10 years, splitting rent, raising a dog, arguing over who forgot to buy milk. Basically married, minus one tiny detail. The law didn't see them that way. Before 2015, many U.S. states banned same-sex marriage. You could love openly, live together, build a whole life. But you couldn't legally say I do. No certificate, no marital benefits, no full legal protection. Then came the Supreme Court decision Obergefell versus Hodges. One ruling that completely redefined marriage under U.S. law, from prohibited to protected, just like that. But if you think everything became simple overnight, not exactly. Even when you're allowed to marry, the fine print still has a way of making couples squint a little closer. Story 4, when love has to wait in line. They signed the divorce papers on Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, one of them had posted a brand new engagement photo. New ring, new smile. Very Chapter 2. Life moves on. Love reloads. The law not impressed. In some states and countries, after a divorce, you can't remarry immediately. There's a mandatory waiting period. A few weeks, a few months, sometimes longer. Why? On paper, it's to make sure there are no unresolved legal disputes. To confirm the judgment is final. And sometimes, to stop people from making lifelong decisions while still emotionally on fire. In other words, love moves fast. The law does not. While you're ready to book the next venue, the legal system is still flipping through paperwork like, hold on, we're not done here. And trust me, this still isn't the strangest barrier marriage laws have created. Story 5. A night in Vegas, and the question, did you actually mean it? Las Vegas, neon lights, music blasting. A tiny chapel open 24 hours. Two people who met at a party decide to do the most vaguest thing possible. Get married immediately. They say, "I do." There's a photo with fake Elvis, there are rings, there's a certificate. The next morning, there's a lawyer. Because in marriage law, one key element is capacity to consent. If someone was too intoxicated to understand what they were doing, the marriage can be declared void. In other words, the court may ask, when you said "I do," did you actually know what you were agreeing to? Vegas moves fast. Impulse moves faster. The law wants clarity. Plot twist. Not every "I do" counts. And if you think alcohol is the only thing that can cancel a marriage, oh, there are stranger reasons coming up. Story 6. When your neighbor can say, "Hold on." Picture this. You're getting married. Dress picked, venue booked. Both families already bought plane tickets. You think the only threat left is bad weather. Nope. In some places, before you can marry, you have to publicly announce your intent. Your names go up on a notice board or at a government office for a set period of time. And during that window, anyone can object. Your neighbor, an ex, that one person who's disliked you since sophomore year. Originally, the rule was meant to prevent illegal marriages, bigamy, fraud, that kind of thing. In reality, it's basically an open invitation for social drama. One person stands up and says, "I object." Everything pauses. So if you thought a wedding was just about two people, sometimes the law hands the mic to the entire neighborhood. Story 7. Before you say "I do," please provide a blood sample. You've picked the venue, tried on the dress, ordered the cake. You think the next step is practicing your vows. Plot twist. In parts of U.S. history before getting married, you had to pass a mandatory medical test. Not a diet check. Not a zodiac compatibility scan. An actual health screening, especially for infectious diseases like syphilis, which was a serious public concern in the 20th century. On paper, the idea made sense. Protect public health. Prevent disease from spreading within marriage. But it also meant the government could require your private medical information just because you wanted to get married. And that's where the debate began. Where's the line between protecting the public and invading privacy? Love might be between two people. But according to the law, sometimes it's also between you and a lab technician. Story 8. When the wedding night becomes Exhibit A. They had the perfect wedding. Photos so good they could advertise the florist. Friends posting couple goals. It looked like the final scene of a rom-com. A few months later, they're not arguing about dishes. They're arguing in court. The issue: the marriage was never consummated because one spouse had a medical condition that wasn't disclosed before the wedding. Yes, it's deeply personal, but in many legal systems that can be grounds for annulment, not divorce, annulment, meaning legally speaking the marriage never existed. The court doesn't ask, "Do you still love each other?" They ask, "Was the original consent based on full disclosure?" And imagine a lawyer completely serious discussing the wedding night in legal terms. Lesson in marriage law: sometimes the fine print matters more than the vows. Story 9. Love behind bars. He was serving time in a maximum security prison. Lights on schedule, steel doors opening and closing like clockwork. Everything controlled. Except one thing: love. He wanted to marry the girlfriend who had waited for him for years. The prison said no. Security concerns, paperwork, risk, not practical. So the real question became this: when someone loses their freedom, do they automatically lose the right to marry too? The case went to court. Judges had to balance two things: a citizen's constitutional rights and the prison system's authority to maintain order. The final ruling: inmates do not completely lose the right to marry, but that right can be reasonably restricted. Sounds straightforward. In reality, even love has to pass a security check. And if you think prison walls are the ultimate limit of marriage law, just wait for what comes next. Story 10. Love, or a visa. They met fast, fell in love faster, and got married faster than 2-day Amazon shipping. A few weeks after the wedding, immigration started asking questions. They lived at different addresses. Neither could remember the other's toothbrush color. When asked who cooks at home, both answered, Uber Eats. U.S. immigration law treats marriage fraud for citizenship as a serious federal crime. If a marriage is proven to exist only for immigration benefits, the consequences can include fines, deportation, even criminal charges. The court doesn't care about wedding photos. They care about evidence. Joint bank accounts, shared bills, and actual shared life. The climax love has to survive a federal interview. Because legally speaking, not every I love you comes with a green card. Story 11. When I do is younger than a driver's license. Imagine this. A teenage girl isn't old enough to buy a beer. Not old enough to sign her own phone contract. But in some states, she can get married. Yeah, let that sit for a second. In the U.S., marriage age laws aren't fully uniform. For years, some states allowed minors to marry with parental consent or court approval. In certain cases, the age was lower than most people assume. The legal argument, family rights, special circumstances, judicial discretion. But that opens a much bigger question. Can someone who isn't legally an adult truly consent to a lifelong commitment one state tightens the rules? Another leaves the door slightly open. Same country, different standards. And that's when the debate kicks in. Are we protecting tradition or protecting kids? Because sometimes the most shocking part isn't the wedding itself. It's how young someone can legally say I do. Story 12. When love needs mom's signature. You're 20. You have a driver's license, a bank account. You can sign a lease. But when you want to get married, in some legal systems, you still need a parent's signature. Feels like a teen movie plot, right? For years, and in some places, even now, marriage laws require people under a certain age to get parental or guardian consent. On paper, it sounds reasonable. Protect young people from impulsive decisions. Sure. But here's the awkward question. If you're old enough to work full-time, pay taxes, even join the military, why aren't you old enough to decide who you marry? Tradition says family should have a say. Individual freedom says love is your call. And right in the middle of that debate is a marriage license waiting for one more signature. Story 13. When the bank account has secrets, they were wildly in love. Wedding photos looked like a happy credit card commercial. Smiling, glowing, financially mysterious. A few months later, an envelope from the bank shows up. Not a congratulations card, a debt notice. Turns out one spouse hid a massive amount of debt before the wedding. Or flipped version, a hidden pile of assets nobody mentioned. In many legal systems, serious financial deception can be grounds for annulment. The logic is simple. If consent to marry was based on major false information, the marriage itself can be declared invalid. Sounds like primetime drama. It's not. It's very real legal doctrine. The court doesn't ask who loves who more, they ask, was there full and honest financial disclosure? Because in marriage, love may be blind. But the law reads the bank statements very carefully. Story 14. When family boundaries depend on the map. Two people fall in love. They're not siblings. Didn't grow up together. They're distant cousins. In one state, they can apply for a marriage license like anyone else. Drive a few hours across the border completely illegal. Welcome to the patchwork of U.S. state law. Cousin marriage laws are not uniform. Some states allow it. Some ban it outright. Others allow it, with conditions, age requirements, genetic counseling, medical testing. There's no single nationwide rule. Cross a state line, and you might cross into a totally different legal universe. This isn't just about statutes. It reflects regional history, culture, and long-standing local values. So if you think marriage in America only requires love and a license, sometimes you also need Google Maps. Story 15. When one spouse only is the law. In a small town, a man lives with multiple women and calls it family. For them, it's faith. Personal choice. For U.S. law, potentially a crime. Anti-polygamy laws date back to the 19th century, especially targeting communities that practice plural marriage. Legally speaking, bigamy or polygamy violates marriage statutes and can lead to criminal charges. The state's logic is straightforward. Property rights, inheritance, tax benefits, all built around a one-spouse system. But here's where the debate heats up. If consenting adults choose it as part of their religious belief, should the government intervene? One side says personal freedom. The other says legal structure. And right in the middle of that argument sits the bigger question: does love have limits because of the law? Or does the law draw the limits around love? Story 16. When the past cancels the future. They met through friends, dated, fell in love, got engaged. One of them talked about a rough childhood, moving a lot, made a few small mistakes. Except, small wasn't exactly small. After the wedding, the truth came out. A serious criminal conviction had been deliberately hidden, not a parking ticket, a felony that could affect safety and the other spouse's entire life. In some legal systems, intentionally concealing a major criminal history can be grounds for annulment, especially if it's clear the other person would never have agreed to marry had they known. The court doesn't retry the crime. They examine the deception. Because in marriage, it's not only about what you did, it's whether you were honest about it. And sometimes the past doesn't disappear. It just waits for its court date. Story 17. When love needs probation approval, he's not in prison, but he's not exactly free either. He's on probation. Every move monitored. Where he goes, who he meets. Even leaving the county can require permission. And then, he wants to get married. Sounds simple, right? Not quite. When you're on probation or supervised release, certain civil rights can be restricted. Depending on the court's conditions, he might need approval from his probation officer, or prove the marriage won't violate supervision terms. So now it's not just booking a venue and sending invites. It could mean filing paperwork, review hearings, official clearance. In theory, the state wants safety and compliance. In reality, it can feel like asking permission to fall in love, and that's when it hits you. Even wedding vows can come with conditions attached. Story 18. When love has to wait for the draft. They planned a summer wedding. Venue booked, family ready, invites sent, everything checked off the list. Except one thing, military service. In some countries, laws once required men to complete mandatory service before they could legally marry. The reasoning sounded very official. Serve your country first, then build a family. On paper, logical. In real life, complicated. You're old enough to get married, old enough to support a household, but not eligible because you haven't finished your service time. The tension here isn't just paperwork. It's personal love colliding with civic duty. One oath is made to the person you love. The other is made to your country. And at certain points in history, the law basically said, pick the order carefully. Story 19, when I do isn't really consent. The wedding goes exactly as planned. Family packed in, ceremony flawless. They stand in front of everyone and say, I do. Applause, photos, happily ever after. Supposedly. Then the truth surfaces. One of them never truly wanted to get married. There was pressure, family expectations, community influence, emotional threats. In marriage law, voluntary consent is everything. If a marriage is proven to have been entered under coercion, a court can grant an annulment. Not because the couple isn't compatible, but because real consent never existed in the first place. The law doesn't just protect the ceremony, it protects individual freedom. Because saying I do in front of a crowd doesn't mean you were ever allowed to say no. And sometimes justice begins with acknowledging that love cannot be signed under pressure. Story 20. When love had to pass a social status check. Today you can fall for a CEO or a barista. The law shrugs. But historically, not that simple. There were periods when marriage between social classes was legally restricted. Nobles couldn't marry commoners. Lower classes couldn't marry into higher ranks. Love didn't just fight family disapproval. It had to fight written law. The old logic sounded very official. Protect bloodlines. Preserve property. Maintain social order. In reality, marriage became a tool to keep class divisions intact. History teaches something important here. Law reflects the values of its time. When society shifts, the law eventually has to follow. Because in the end, love doesn't check your social ranking before it shows up. Story 21. When the age for I do depends on your zip code. In the U.S., you can drive at a certain age, drink at 21. But when it comes to marriage, the answer might change depending on which state you're standing in. That's federalism for you. Each state sets its own marriage age laws. The result? not exactly uniform. Some states draw a hard line. Others have allowed exceptions with parental consent or court approval, which leads to an interesting legal twist. A marriage perfectly valid in one state might raise eyebrows in another. Same country, different standards. People hear that and go, wait, how that's the federal system. State autonomy brings flexibility. It also creates legal gaps. So sometimes becoming old enough for love isn't just about your maturity, it's about your mailing address. Story 22. When the wedding is missing. An audience. They planned a tiny ceremony, no distant relatives, no live stream, no dramatic entrance music, just the two of them and an officiant. Romantic, absolutely. Legally solid, maybe not. In some states and countries, marriage law requires at least one or two witnesses. No witnesses, no valid marriage. Sounds like a small technicality. In legal terms, small can become very big. Missing signatures, missing witnesses, missing legal standing. And then years later, when it's time to prove marital status for inheritance property or insurance surprise, paperwork problem. Turns out love doesn't just require two people saying yes. It may also require a couple of humans standing there watching and signing. Lesson: if your wedding is too private, the law might not see it at all. Story 23. When you get married. In the wrong jurisdiction. They wanted a destination wedding. Beach view, perfect sunset. Photos that look like a travel ad. Everything cinematic. There's just one tiny issue. They filed the marriage license in a place that didn't actually have authority to issue it. Sounds like harmless paperwork drama, right? Not exactly. In-law jurisdiction matters. If the license is issued by the wrong office or the ceremony happens outside a legally recognized area, the marriage can be invalid. Now imagine believing you've been legally married for years. Then during a property transfer or immigration process, you discover, legally speaking, you never were. The law doesn't care how pretty the sunset was. It cares where the official seal came from. Lesson: before booking the flowers, check the legal map. Because sometimes you didn't marry the wrong person. You just married in the wrong place. Story 24. When I do happens, twice. He had a beautiful wedding. Glowing photos, both families smiling like everything was perfect. A few years later, he had another wedding. Small detail. The first marriage never legally ended. In U.S. law, marrying someone while you're still legally married to another person is called bigamy. And that's not just family drama. That's a criminal offense. Marriage is treated as an exclusive legal relationship between two people. Property rights, inheritance, insurance benefits. All built on the assumption that there's only one valid marriage at a time. Break that assumption. It's not just divorce on the table. It can mean prosecution. Sounds like a soap opera plot. But in real life, the law doesn't cue background music. Lesson: before saying "I do" again, make sure the first one is officially over. Story 25. When disappearing becomes a legal decision. They argued. Nothing dramatic. Who forgot the electric bill? Who came home late? Nobody thought it was the beginning of a vanishing act. Then one day, one of them leaves. No clear explanation, no plan to return, no financial support, no contact. In marriage law, that can be called desertion. And in many legal systems, it's valid grounds for divorce. No cheating required, no violence necessary. Just proof that one spouse intentionally abandoned the marriage for a certain period without justification. It sounds simple. He just left. But the law looks at responsibility. Because marriage isn't only about feelings. It's also a legal obligation. And sometimes disappearing isn't just personal drama. It's a decision with consequences in court. Story 26. When you think you're free, but the law disagrees. They signed the divorce papers. Deep breath, chapter closed. New life loading. A few weeks later, one of them is already planning another wedding. Totally reasonable, right? Except for one tiny detail. The divorce judgment isn't legally final yet. In many legal systems, even after a judge announces the divorce, there's a waiting period before it officially takes effect. During that window, you're still legally married. So if you remarry too soon, the law might call it bigamy. Yes, that escalated quickly. Emotions may have ended the relationship. The paperwork hasn't, and the law it loves completed procedures. Lesson before saying I do again make absolutely sure I'm divorced is fully processed with stamp dates and 0 pending timelines. Story 27 before you marry. Please have a seat. You think the final step before the wedding is a dress fitting or practicing your vows in the mirror. In some places, it's counseling. Official, structured, possibly with homework. Some states have required couples to attend premarital counseling or education classes before issuing a marriage license. The goal, lower divorce rates. The logic sounds practical. Talk about money, kids, conflict, expectations. Handle the hard stuff before the cake is cut. It's basically the government saying we support your love, but please review the syllabus. Some couples find it helpful, others think this is private, fair. But the message from the law is clear. Marriage isn't just romance, it's a long-term legal contract, and apparently contracts sometimes come with orientation sessions. Story 28. When love comes with an expiration date. They got their marriage license, stamped, official. Felt like unlocking a new life level. All that's left the big day. Then life shows up uninvited. Venue cancels, DJ backs out, groom gets sick. Bride changes the flower color 3 times. So the wedding gets postponed a few weeks, no big deal. Right, until they notice one tiny detail. The marriage license has an expiration date. In many states, if the ceremony doesn't happen within a set time frame, the license becomes invalid. No extensions. No, but love needs flexibility. You start over. New forms, new fees, new line at the clerk's office. Love might be timeless. Paperwork is not. Lesson before booking the honeymoon, check the expiration date on the license. Story 29. One signature and a legal plot twist. Their wedding was so perfect you'd think Netflix already optioned it. Dress flowing in the wind. Groom slightly shaking during his vows. Bride glowing. Witnesses nodding like responsible citizens. Everyone signs the paperwork. At least, they think they did. Years later, while applying for a mortgage, a bank employee squints at the file and says, looks like the officiant never signed. Missing 1 signature. Under the law, if the marriage certificate isn't properly executed, the marriage may not be legally complete, meaning on paper they're basically 2 very committed roommates. The law is not impressed by a 3-tier wedding cake. It fixates on blank boxes. Lesson: forget the flowers if you must. Forget the speech. Do not forget the signatures. Because sometimes love doesn't fall apart from drama. It falls apart from paperwork. Story 30. When the family tree becomes a legal issue. They met as adults. Didn't grow up together. No shared childhood memories. Just one tiny detail they didn't notice at first. They were closely related. Sounds like a dramatic TV plot twist, right? Except laws about blood relations are a serious part of marriage law in most countries. In the U.S., marriage between siblings is clearly prohibited. But when it comes to cousins, distant relatives, or extended family connections, rules can vary by state. Some states ban it entirely. Some allow it under certain conditions. Different states. Different lines on the family tree. These differences reflect a mix of genetics, culture, and legal tradition. The law doesn't just look at love. It studies lineage. And sometimes before saying I do, you might need to double-check how many branches separate you on the family diagram. Story 31. When the law finally catches up to love. There were times in history when the law said no, because a couple had different skin colors. Times it said no, because they were the same gender. Times it added conditions, barriers, signatures, waiting periods, basically a final exam before you could say I do. But society changed. Cases went to court. Personal stories became legal precedent. Step by step, what was once prohibited became recognized, then protected. The journey from ban to constitutional protection didn't happen overnight. It took years of litigation debate and shifting social values. Law doesn't stay frozen. It mirrors its era. And here's the pattern. Love usually moves first. The law follows behind. Sometimes slowly, sometimes reluctantly. But eventually it adjusts. Because you can draft laws in ink. You can stamp them with seals. But you can't regulate love forever. The law isn't just written in thick textbooks with cold coffee sitting next to them. It's written from real stories, From couples who were arrested for loving each other. From missing signatures. From I do said at the wrong time. Every rule we just talked about isn't random trivia. It shaped real lives, real families, real decisions. Now it's your turn. Which law shocked you the most? Which one made you pause and say, wait, that's still legal? Drop a comment, share this with the person you're going to marry, or the one you almost did, because sometimes love wins, but only after the law finally catches up.